They marked her as slow, called her a risk, failed her in drills she executed flawlessly while laughing behind clipboards and stacking the odds against her like sandbags on a collapsing wall. And she didn't break, didn't yell, didn't even flinch. She just kept showing up, kept moving forward with that dead-level stare that never gave them the satisfaction of seeing her hurt. Until the day they tried to accuse her publicly in front of the entire platoon for defending herself after being attacked during a trust evaluation drill. That's when the Navy SEAL commander stepped in, called her into his office, said 6 words she didn't expect, and when he slid a weapon across the desk, not just any weapon, but one that carried 30 years of silence, guilt, and unfinished business, everything changed. Now, before we show you what she did next and how the entire unit responded once the truth came out, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and tap the bell icon. Because what she proved that day didn't come from a badge or a recommendation letter. It came from silence and the discipline to let the facts do the damage. The wind off the Hindu Kush came in low and bitter that morning, scraping across the forward operating base in Helmand Province, like it was testing every piece of metal, every nerve, every promise made before deployment. Everything smelled like dust and diesel fuel, and that particular brand of fear that settles into your lungs when the radio goes quiet at the wrong time. It was 2016, late summer, the kind of heat that made you forget what water tasted like before it was boiled in your canteen. Corporal Kira Brennan, 27 years old, 5'8", of coiled tension and calculated movement, pressed her back against the collapsed door frame of what used to be a safe house. Now it was just rubble and exposed rebar and the kind of silence that comes right before everything goes loud again. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not like this, not alone. The IED had taken out the front wall 40 seconds ago. The blast had thrown her spotter, Lance Corporal Davies, straight through a support beam. He wasn't getting up. The corpsman, bleeding from his ears and barely conscious, lay 10 feet to her left behind a chunk of concrete that used to be part of the ceiling. Kira's leg was pinned under a steel beam. Not crushed, not broken, just trapped, immobilized. The kind of trapped that makes you choose between panic and mathematics. She chose mathematics. Through the haze and the ringing in her ears, she counted movement outside. 12 hostiles. Taliban fighters emboldened by the explosion moving in from the ridgeline, with the confidence of men who knew the Americans inside were hurt, isolated, and running out of time. Kira adjusted her grip on the M40A5 sniper rifle. Checked the chamber. 8 rounds left. No backup mag within reach. Davies had been carrying the spare ammunition. The radio on her chest rig crackled with static, then a voice broke through. Calm. Professional, 1,000 miles away in terms of safety. Viper 2, this is Overwatch. Abort position. QRF inbound 15 mics. Acknowledge. 15 minutes. Quick reaction force. Help was coming. But 15 minutes was 3 lifetimes when you had 12 fighters closing in and 2 wounded men who couldn't move. Kira pressed the transmit button. Her voice came out steady flat like she was ordering coffee instead of making a decision that would either save 3 lives or end them. Negative Overwatch. Casualties here. I hold. She released the button. Didn't wait for a response. Because there was nothing left to say. The first Taliban fighter appeared in her scope at 200 meters, moving fast. Too fast. Sloppy with confidence. Kira exhaled halfway. Let her heartbeat settle into the space between seconds. Squeezed. The rifle bucked. The fighter dropped. 11 left. The next 2 appeared together, trying to flank from the east side. She adjusted, led the target by half a body width to account for wind, and fired twice in 4 seconds. 9 left. They scattered after that, realized whoever was inside wasn't as hurt as they'd thought. But they didn't retreat. They repositioned. Smarter now, more cautious. Kira dragged herself 6 inches to the right using her elbows and her one free leg, ignoring the way the beam dug into her thigh with every movement. She found a new angle. Waited. Patience wasn't optional in her line of work. It was the difference between breathing and bleeding out in a foreign country nobody back home could pronounce correctly. A head appeared behind a low wall, then a rifle barrel. She put a round through the gap before the fighter could acquire target. 8 left. The corpsman behind her groaned, tried to move. Kira didn't turn around, couldn't afford to. She kept her eye on the scope scanning, searching for the next threat. Stay down, she said. Quiet, firm, not a request. Two more fighters broke from cover, sprinting toward a closer position. Bold, stupid, she dropped the first mid-stride. The second made it 3 more steps before her round found him. 6 left. Her shoulder ached from the recoil. The beam on her leg was cutting off circulation. She could feel her foot going numb. Didn't matter, wouldn't matter for another 12 minutes. 3 fighters tried to suppress her position with automatic fire. Rounds stitched across the doorframe, kicking up chunks of concrete and dust. Kira pressed herself flat, waited for the pause, then rose just enough to sight through the scope. She fired 3 times. 3 distinct cracks that echoed across the valley. 3 fewer problems. 3 left. The remaining fighters held their position. Smart, waiting for her to run out of ammunition or reinforcements to arrive, whichever came first. Kira checked her chamber. 1 round. The wind shifted, carried voices. The fighters were talking to each other, regrouping, probably calling for their own backup. She did the math again. 1 round. 3 targets. No good options. Then she heard it. The distant thump of rotor blades. QRF inbound. Maybe 8 minutes out now. The fighters heard it too. They made their move, all 3 at once. Closing fast, Kira sighted the lead fighter. Exhaled, fired, he dropped. The other 2 kept coming. She let the rifle fall on its sling, pulled her sidearm, a Sig Sauer M18, and put 2 rounds into the nearest fighter at 30 meters. He stumbled, fell, didn't get up. The last one raised his AK. Kira rolled left, the beam scraping across her leg, and fired 3 times. Center mass. The fighter collapsed 10 feet from the doorway. Silence. The kind of silence that comes after violence. Heavy, ringing, full of questions nobody wanted to ask. Kira holstered her sidearm, pulled her knife from her belt, and started working on the beam. Not to free her poem, that would take equipment she didn't have, but to create enough space to drag herself backward. It took 4 minutes. 4 minutes of controlled breathing, controlled pain, controlled everything except the small animal part of her brain that wanted to scream. When she finally freed herself, she crawled to the corpsman, checked his pulse. Steady, weak, but steady. She applied a pressure bandage to the worst of his lacerations, then dragged him by his vest toward the back wall where there was more cover. Then she went to Davies. He was gone. Had been gone since the blast. She closed his eyes, took his dog tags, and moved him next to the corpsman. By the time the QRF Blackhawks touched down, Kira was sitting against the wall, leg-elevated rifle across her lap, methodically reloading magazines from Davies's ammo pouch. A staff sergeant from the Quick Reaction Force jumped out, scanned the scene, bodies, outside blood, inside 1 Marine alive, and sitting like she was waiting for a bus. Jesus Christ, Corporal. How many were there? Kira didn't look up, just kept loading rounds. 12. The staff sergeant looked outside again. Counted. You held this position alone for 14 minutes. 15, Kira said. You were a minute late. They gave her a Bronze Star with a V device for valor, classified it because the mission was off books and the safe house wasn't supposed to exist. No headlines, no parade, just a piece of metal in a drawer and a memory that woke her up at 0300 some nights, wondering if she'd been fast enough, smart enough, cold enough to do it all again. She never talked about it. Not to other Marines, not to the psych evaluators, not to anyone. Because silence, her father had taught her before he deployed for the last time, was the strongest weapon you could carry. Not because you couldn't speak, but because you chose not to. You let the work speak. Let the results speak. Let the people who needed convincing convince themselves. And 6 years later, standing on the edge of the gravel lot at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, watching the Pacific wind whip flags into sharp cracks against their poles, Kira Brennan would need every ounce of that silence. Because the men waiting for her on this base didn't care what she'd done in Helmand Province. They cared about what she represented. And to some of them, that was a threat worse than any enemy fighter. The morning she arrived at Coronado, the sky was the color of old concrete. Gray, flat, unforgiving. The kind of sky that made everything underneath it feel small and temporary. Kira stepped off the transport van with a single duffel bag and a file folder tucked under her arm. 32 years old now. leaner than she'd been in Helmand, harder in places that didn't show on the outside. She wore her Marine Corps utilities with the same precision she'd worn them 6 years ago, sleeves rolled to regulation boots, polished to a dull sheen that said she cared about standards without being obsessive about them. Her dark hair was pulled back tight. No makeup, no jewelry, nothing that would give anyone an excuse to say she wasn't serious. She was serious. She'd been serious since the day she turned 18 and walked into the recruiting office, ignoring the Navy recruiter who told her she wasn't ready for the SEAL Challenge program and signed her name on the Marine Corps line instead. The Combat Support Integration Assessment. That's what they called it. A pilot program designed to test whether specialists from other branches, Force Recon Marines Army, Rangers Air Force, Pararescue could integrate into SEAL operations without compromising effectiveness. It wasn't a pipeline to become a SEAL. It was a pipeline to prove you could work alongside them, support them, carry your weight when everything broke and the only thing that mattered was competence under pressure. On paper, it was a 6-week evaluation, combat drills, live fire exercises, tactical assessments, physical conditioning, psychological evaluations. In practice, it was a filtration system designed to separate the capable from the catastrophic. Kira had read the brief, knew the statistics. 43 candidates had gone through the program in the past 2 years. 8 had passed. None of them were women. She didn't care about the statistics. Statistics were just numbers until you made them irrelevant. She walked across the lot toward the admin building, her boots crunching on gravel that had been walked over by men who thought they owned the definition of excellence. The air smelled like salt and rust and something else, something sharper. Judgment, maybe. Or anticipation. Outside the building, a formation of candidates stood in loose rows. 23 men, all of them older, broader, louder than her in the way that men who've never been questioned tend to be. A few glanced her way. Most didn't. At the front of the formation stood a man who looked like he'd been carved from the same stone as the base itself. Master Chief Owen Dahlridge, 57 years old. Silver hair cut close to the scalp, jaw like a hatchet blade, eyes that didn't blink often enough to be friendly. He held a clipboard, wore his sealed trident like it was a warning label. Kira joined the back of the formation, stood at attention, didn't introduce herself, didn't need to. Dowridge began reading names, checking faces, assigning bunk numbers and gear locker locations. His voice was flat, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't need to yell to make people shut up and listen. When he reached her name, he stopped. Brennan. Kira's spine straightened another quarter inch. Captain Kira Brennan, United States Marine Corps, Force Recon. Dahlridge looked up from the clipboard. His eyes found her in the back row. Held there. Any relation to Lieutenant Jack Brennan? The question hit like a breaching charge. Sudden, precise, designed to open something that was supposed to stay closed. Kira didn't flinch. Yes, Master Chief, my father. Dowridge's jaw shifted. Not quite a smile, not quite a grimace. Something in between that lived in the space where old wounds don't heal correctly. Lieutenant Jack Brennan, SEAL Team 3, killed in action, Mogadishu, Somalia, October 1994. He said it loud enough for the entire formation to hear. Not as a memorial, as a data point. He died because Army Rangers couldn't hold their position during a joint operations extraction. Integration failure. Command wrote a whole doctrine revision because of that day. Kira said nothing. There was nothing to say. Not yet. Dowridge closed the clipboard. Welcome to Coronado, Captain. Let's see if you fare better than he did. The words landed like body blows. Public. Intentional. Designed to crack her composure before she'd even started. Kira's expression didn't change. She didn't look away. Didn't drop her eyes. Just stood there absorbing it the way you absorb incoming fire, acknowledge it exists, then keep moving. Dowridge held her gaze for another 3 seconds. Then he moved on to the next name. But Kira knew, standing there in the back row with 23 men who just watched her get her family history weaponized in front of them, that this wasn't going to be an assessment. It was going to be a war of attrition. And Master Chief Owen Dahlridge had just fired the opening shot. After formation, the candidates were divided into evaluation groups. Kira found herself assigned to Group 3 under the direct oversight of Chief Petty Officer Wade Kellerman. Kellerman was 35, medium height, medium build. The kind of man whose most dangerous feature was the clipboard he carried everywhere like a religious text. He had the look of someone who'd spent more time in admin offices than combat zones, but had learned to speak the language well enough to fool people who didn't know the difference. He smiled when he introduced himself. It didn't reach his eyes. "Captain Brennan," he said, shaking her hand with the grip of someone testing for weakness. "Heard a lot about your old man. Legend around here. In a cautionary tale kind of way." Kira released his hand, said nothing. Kellerman's smile widened. "You'll be bunking in Building 7. Gear issue at 1400. First drill tomorrow 0530. Obstacle course. Hope you got your cardio up to speed." "I'm ready, Chief." "We'll see." The way he said it casual dismissive like he'd already written her evaluation in his head made it clear that Kellerman wasn't interested in what she could do. He was interested in confirming what he already believed she couldn't. Kira took her bunk assignment and walked toward Building 7. The barracks were standard military issue. Concrete, functional, smelling faintly of disinfectant and old sweat. She found her bunk, dropped her duffel, and started unpacking. A few of the other candidates filtered in. Most ignored her. One, a tall Marine raider with a southern accent and a face that looked like it had stopped, a few punches, nodded. "Brennan, right. Corporal Ethan Hayes, Raiders. Heard what Dalridge said out there. That was rough." Kira folded a shirt. Precise. Controlled. "It's fine." Hayes studied her for a moment. "Yeah, just so you know, not all of us think like that. Some of us are here to see if this integration thing actually works." "Appreciate it." Hayes nodded and moved to his own bunk. The conversation died there, not unfriendly, just aware that words didn't matter yet. Only performance. Kira finished unpacking, set her gear in the locker with the same methodical precision she did everything. Then she walked outside, found the memorial wall near the command building, and stopped. There were names, hundreds of them, etched into black granite. SEALs who died in training and combat in places that didn't make the news. And there, 3 rows from the top, was her father's name. Lieutenant Jack Brennan, SEAL Team 3, KIA Somalia, October 1994. Kira reached out, let her fingers trace the letters. She'd been born 4 months after he died. Never met him. Never heard his voice, except through old answering machine tapes her mother couldn't bring herself to erase. But she knew him. Knew him through stories. Through the letters he'd written to her mother before deployment. Through the men who'd served with him and told her years later over beers they didn't finish that Jack Brennan had been the kind of operator who made everyone around him better. He'd believed in joint operations, believed that Marines and SEALs and Rangers working together made America's military stronger, not weaker. He'd volunteered for cross-training programs, pushed for integration policies, and he died during a mission where coordination failed, where communication broke down, where good men ended up in bad positions because the system wasn't ready for what they were trying to build. Master Chief Owen Dalridge had been there, had survived, had watched Rangers fail to extract SEAL teammates because the command structure was fractured and the trust wasn't deep enough. And for 30 years, Dalridge had carried that failure like shrapnel embedded too close to the spine to remove. Kira understood that, understood trauma, understood how men coped with guilt by building walls and calling them standards. But understanding didn't mean accepting. She pulled her hand back from the memorial, stood there for another moment, then turned and walked toward the training compound. If her father had believed integration could work, then she'd prove it, not with words, not with arguments, with silence and results, and the kind of competence that left no room for doubt, even if it killed her. The first drill came at 0530 the next morning. The sky was still dark stars fading into that pre-dawn gray that made everything look half-formed and uncertain. The obstacle course stretched across 200 meters of sand, steel, and engineered misery. Rope climbs, wall traverses, low crawls under barbed wire, monkey bars over mud pits, a final sprint up a 40-degree incline that left even conditioned athletes gasping. Dalridge stood at the starting line with a stopwatch and a face that suggested he'd seen this course destroy better people than anyone standing in front of him. "Standard time is 6 minutes 30 seconds, he announced. "Anything over 7 minutes is a fail. Anything under 5:30 means you're cutting corners or getting lucky. Neither impresses me." The candidates lined up. Kira drew the 8th position, middle of the pack, not early enough to set a pace, not late enough to fade into the background. The first candidate went, a SEAL trainee, mid-20s, all muscle and no wasted movement. He finished in 6 minutes, 12 seconds. Clean, efficient. The second candidate, an Army Ranger, finished in 6:40, passed but barely. By the time Kira stepped to the line, the sun was cresting the horizon. Kellerman stood nearby with his clipboard, watching, waiting for something to write down. "Ready, Captain?" Dowridge asked. "Ready, Master Chief." The whistle blew. Kira exploded forward, hit the first obstacle, a rope climb over a 15-foot wall, and moved with the kind of economy that came from doing this 1,000 times until the movements lived in muscle memory instead of conscious thought. Up, over, down. The low crawl was next. 30 meters of sand and rocks under barbed wire strung low enough to catch uniforms and skin if you lifted your head too high. Kira kept her body flat, elbows, driving legs, propelling her forward with short, controlled bursts. 18 seconds. Through. The monkey bars stretched over a mud pit designed to punish anyone who lost their grip. Kira's hands found each bar with precision. No hesitation, no second guessing, just forward momentum. At the halfway point, her right hand slipped, just barely, just enough to throw her rhythm. She adjusted, caught the next bar with her left, kept moving, made it across, no fall, no time lost. The wall traverse came next. 8 feet high, 20 feet long, handholds spaced just far enough apart to test grip strength and core stability. Kira moved laterally, hand over hand boots, finding purchase on holds that weren't really meant for feet. She hit the end, dropped, rolled. Final obstacle, the incline. 40 degrees of loose sand and embedded stones. No ropes, no rails, just you and gravity arguing about who was stronger. Kira drove her legs into the sand, leaned forward, didn't slow down even when her lungs started screaming and her quads started burning with that deep, acidic fire that came right before failure. She hit the top, crossed the line, stopped, chest heaving, sweat dripping, but standing. Dowridge clicked the stopwatch. 6 minutes, 43 seconds. Kira looked at him, didn't speak, just waited. Dowridge made a mark on his clipboard. "Overpace, you'll be marked for remedial conditioning." The words landed flat, final, no room for appeal. Kira blinked once. "Master Chief, the standard is 7 minutes. I finished under. The standard is 6:30 for optimal performance. Anything over means you're pushing too hard. Burning out, that's a liability in sustained operations." It was absurd, a failure condition that didn't exist in any manual. But Dowridge delivered it with the same flat authority he'd used to read names the day before. Kellerman wrote something on his clipboard, smiled. From the sideline, one of the other candidates, a Marine Raider named Corporal Hayes, muttered just loud enough to be heard, "That's bullshit." Dowridge turned. "You have something to add, Corporal?" Hayes met his eyes. "No, Master Chief." But the damage was done. The doubt was planted. A few of the other candidates shifted uncomfortably, not saying anything, not challenging anything, just noticing. Kira walked back to the formation, face blank, breathing controlled. Inside, she was already doing the math. 6:43 was a solid time. Not exceptional, but well within standards. Dowridge had failed her anyway, which meant the times didn't matter. The performance didn't matter. She was here to be broken, and they were going to use every tool available to make it happen. She reached into her cargo pocket, pulled out a small waterproof notebook, the kind Marines carried in the field to log grid coordinates and enemy positions. She opened it, wrote Day 1, obstacle course, 6:43, marked as fail, reason, overpace. Then she closed the notebook, put it back in her pocket, and said nothing, because silence was the strongest weapon, and she was just getting started. The next 3 weeks passed like water through a sieve. Days blurred into each other, marked only by the accumulation of false failures and the growing weight of Kira's notebook. Week 1 brought the close quarters battle assessment, a shoot house, 6 rooms, 12 targets mixed with 4 civilian role players. The standard was clear room-by-room progression with 0 civilian casualties and at least 10 confirmed hostile eliminations. Kira ran it on day 8, Entered through the primary breach point with her M4 raised muzzle tracking with her eyes. First room clear. Two hostiles neutralized with controlled pairs to center mass. Second room, a civilian role player behind a desk. She identified, called it, moved past without engaging. Third room presented the real test. Hostile behind a hostage. Tight angle, maybe 6 inches of clearance. Kira took the shot. Clean headshot. The hostage role player didn't even flinch. She cleared the remaining rooms in 4 minutes and 38 seconds. 12 hostile targets eliminated. 0 civilian casualties. 0 missed shots. When she exited, Kellerman was waiting with his clipboard and that smile that never quite made it to his eyes. "Room 3, he said. "You hesitated before taking the shot. Hesitation gets people killed." Kira kept her rifle low, finger off the trigger. "I confirmed the target, Chief. That's protocol." Protocol is one thing. Combat effectiveness is another. Marked as hesitation under pressure. He wrote it down, made it official with a pen stroke. In her notebook that night, Kira wrote Day 8. CQB, 12 targets, 0 civilian casualties, 438 completion. Marked hesitation, actual target confirmation per ROE. The next day brought breacher training. Candidates were tested on their ability to set explosive charges on reinforced doors, calculate blast radius, and execute entry within regulation time parameters. Kira's turn came in the afternoon heat. The door was steel reinforced, standard commercial grade. She calculated the charge placement, set the det cord with precision that came from 3 years of doing this in places where mistakes meant body bags instead of failed evaluations. She called the countdown. Initiated. The charge blew clean. Door swung open. Entry team would have had perfect access with minimal fragmentation risk. Time 4 minutes, 12 seconds. Well under the 5-minute standard. Kellerman checked his stopwatch, frowned, checked it again. Then he walked over to the door frame, pointed at a small scorch mark on the upper hinge. Excessive charge placement. You could have compromised structural integrity in a real building. Failed. Kira looked at the mark. It was cosmetic, surface level, the kind of scarring that happened on 90% of breaching operations and meant absolutely nothing in terms of structural safety. Chief, that's within acceptable parameters. The door opened, clean, the frame held, and the blast direction was controlled. Kellerman made a note. "I'll decide what's acceptable, Captain." Marked as improper charge calculation. That night, Day 9, breacher qual, 412, clean breach, marked excessive charge, actual textbook execution. By the end of week 2, Kira had been failed on 7 separate drills, each one for reasons that dissolved under any serious scrutiny. Each one documented in Kellerman's official evaluation forms with language that sounded technical and professional, but meant nothing. And each one logged in her notebook with timestamps, witness names when available, and factual descriptions of what actually happened versus what was recorded. The other candidates noticed. Some of them, anyway. Corporal Hayes approached her after a particularly brutal day of conditioning drills where she'd been marked for inadequate recovery time, despite finishing every station faster than regulation required. "You know they're setting you up, right?" Hayes said quietly, standing next to her at the water station. Kira drank, slow, controlled. "I know. You gonna say something? File a complaint?" "No." Hayes looked at her like she just said she planned to swim to China. "Why the hell not?" "Because complaints are noise. Documentation is evidence. I'm collecting evidence." She showed him the notebook, page after page of detailed observations, times, discrepancies, witnesses. Hayes whistled low. "That's either really smart or really pointless. Depends on whether anyone with authority gives a damn." "Someone will," Kira said. She didn't know if she believed in it, but she said it anyway, because the alternative was accepting that the system was too broken to fix, and if she accepted that, there was no point being here. Hayes nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, you're smoking half these drills, better than some of the SEALs I've trained with. Appreciate it. Just keep your head down. Darridge has a long memory and a short tolerance for anything that reminds him he's wrong." Kira capped her water bottle. "Then he's going to have a really bad 6 weeks." Week 3 brought the evolution everyone had been quietly dreading. The combat stress gauntlet. a multi-stage nightmare designed to test physical endurance, tactical decision-making, and psychological resilience under conditions that simulated 72 hours of sustained combat operations compressed into 90 minutes. It started with a mud extraction. A weighted dummy representing a wounded teammate had to be dragged through 100 meters of waist-deep mud while simulated incoming fire-blank rounds and pyrotechnics exploded around you. Then came the ammo relay, a zigzag sprint between barricades while carrying progressively heavier ammunition crates. Drop one, you start over. The platform scramble followed, a 45-degree angled wall with irregular handholds, slick from previous candidates and designed to punish anyone whose grip strength was already shot from the previous stations. After that, a low-light firing scenario. 12 targets in a darkened room, 6 hostile, 6 civilian. You had 90 seconds and 15 rounds. Shoot the wrong one, automatic fail. The final station was hostage recovery, a role player bound and gagged in a smoke-filled room. You had to locate, assess, stabilize, and extract under time pressure, while more blank rounds and pyrotechnics created the sensory overload of urban combat. Regulation time for the entire course was 8 minutes 30 seconds. Anything under 8 was considered exceptional. Kira drew the second position. Early enough that the course was still fresh, late enough that she could watch the first candidate, a SEAL trainee named Bosworth, run it in 7 minutes 51 seconds. Dahlridge nodded approval. Kellerman wrote it down. No criticism, no invented failures, just acknowledgement. Then it was Kira's turn. The whistle blew. She hit the mud pit at full speed. The dummy weighed 180 pounds, probably more with the water saturation. She got both hands under the vest handle, leaned back, and started dragging. The mud sucked at her boots, tried to hold her in place. The blank rounds cracked overhead, close enough to make the lizard part of her brain want to duck, even though she knew they weren't real. She kept moving, steady, relentless. Reached the far end in 1 minute 40 seconds. The ammo relay started immediately. 3 crates, 40 pounds each, staggered positions. She grabbed the first, sprinted to the checkpoint, set it down with control instead of dropping it. Back for the second, then the third. Her shoulders were screaming. Her lungs felt like they'd been packed with broken glass. She ignored both. 2 minutes 53 seconds elapsed. The platform scramble loomed. 45 degrees of smooth wood and holds that were deliberately too far apart. Her hands were slick with mud and sweat. She wiped them on her uniform, knowing it wouldn't help much, and started climbing. Halfway up, her right hand slipped. She caught herself with her left, found a foothold, adjusted, and kept going. No panic, no hesitation, just problem solving at speed. She crested the top, dropped down the other side. 4 minutes 18 seconds. The low-light room was next. She entered with her rifle up, letting her eyes adjust to the darkness for exactly 2 seconds, all the time she could afford. The targets appeared as shapes. She identified, prioritized, engaged. 6 shots, 6 hostile targets down, 0 civilian casualties. 4 minutes 53 seconds. Final station, the smoke-filled room. She entered low sweeping with her rifle mounted light, found the hostage behind an overturned table. Checked for injuries. Role player was simulating a shoulder wound, applied pressure, zip-tied the restraints off, and started dragging. The smoke was thick, chemical, the kind that burned your eyes and made your throat close up. She navigated by counting steps and remembering the floor plan from the brief. Reached the exit, pushed through, crossed the final line, stopped, chest heaving, uniform soaked through, but standing. She looked at Dahlridge, waited for the time. He looked at his stopwatch. His jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. 7 minutes, 28 seconds. Silence. 7:28. That was exceptional. That was faster than Bosworth. That was faster than 90% of the SEALs who'd run this course in the past year. Kellerman stepped forward, clipboard ready. Captain Brennan, you'll be marked for remedial training. Kira's expression didn't change. On what grounds, Chief? Overpace, you push too hard. In sustained operations, that kind of expenditure isn't sustainable. You'd burn out your team. It was the same excuse from the obstacle course. Repackaged, redeployed, still just as meaningless. But this time someone else spoke up. That's not true. Every head turned. Petty Officer First Class Everett Hale stood near the observation area. 38 years old, sandy-haired, quiet, the kind of operator who didn't speak unless he had something worth saying. Doweridge's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me, petty officer." Hale stepped forward, calm, professional, not challenging, just correcting. "Master Chief, that's 3 runs under regulation." Captain Brennan's pace was controlled and her execution was textbook. Marking that as a failure doesn't align with assessment standards. The air got very still, very cold. Kellerman's smile vanished. "Petty Officer Hale, are you questioning the evaluation criteria?" "I'm questioning the consistency, Chief. Seaman Bosworth ran 7:51 and passed. Captain Brennan ran 7:28 and you're marking her for remedial. That's not a standard, that's a bias." 2 more SEALs in the observation area shifted their stance. Not vocal agreement, not yet, but body language that said they were listening. Considering, Doweridge's face was stone. "We evaluate each candidate individually based on their demonstrated capabilities and potential liabilities. Captain Brennan's approach shows a tendency toward overexertion that could compromise team effectiveness." Hale didn't back down. "With respect, Master Chief, she just outperformed your top SEAL trainee. If that's a liability, I'd hate to see what you consider an asset." The silence that followed was the kind that comes right before someone makes a decision that can't be unmade. Dowridge stared at Hale for 5 full seconds. Then he turned to Kira. "Dismiss, Wepton. Your evaluation stands as marked." Kira didn't argue. She just nodded, picked up her rifle, and walked back toward the equipment shed. But as she passed Hale, she caught his eye, gave him the smallest nod. Not gratitude, not friendship, just acknowledgement that he'd done something most people wouldn't do. He'd told the truth when lying was easier. That night, she wrote in her notebook, Day 19, Combat Stress Gauntlet, 728. All stations executed per protocol, marked overpace remedial. Witness PO1, Hale challenged evaluation publicly. First break in the wall, and for the first time since arriving at Coronado, Kira allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't entirely alone in this. The breaking point came on day 24. They called it the Weapons Retention Under Duress Drill. It was designed to test a candidate's ability to maintain control of their primary weapon while under physical attack. The protocol was clear. 2 candidates paired up. One acted as the aggressor, attempting to disarm. The other defended using approved hand-to-hand techniques. Force was supposed to be controlled. Simulated aggression, not actual combat. Safety observers present at all times. When Kellerman announced the pairings that morning, Kira knew immediately it was another setup. "Captain Brennan, you'll partner with Petty Officer Strand." Garrett Strand, 24 years old, 6'2", 220 pounds of muscle and insecurity wrapped in a SEAL trainee uniform. He was Doweridge's newest protege, the kind of young operator who confused aggression with competence and followed orders without questioning whether those orders were right. Kira had watched him during previous drills. He was talented, fast, strong, but he had that edge, that need to prove himself that made him dangerous in training environments where ego could override safety. They stood in the sand circle, Kira with her M4 slung across her chest, muzzle down, safety on. Strand circling her like he was sizing up an opponent instead of a training partner. Doweridge stood 20 feet back, arms crossed. Kellerman lingered nearby with his clipboard. No safety observer was called forward. That should have been the first warning sign. "Begin," Doweridge said. Strand moved in, not aggressive yet, just closing distance, testing her reactions. Kira maintained her stance, feet shoulder-width apart, hands ready but not threatening. Protocol said the defender should maintain a non-confrontational posture until force was initiated. The first hit came fast, an elbow check to her ribs, not simulated, not pulled, full force. The air punched out of Kira's lungs. She exhaled hard, absorbed it, didn't react. Protocol said respond after 3 contacts. That was 1. Strand circled again. Faster now, then a shoulder bump, hard enough to snap her back a half step and throw her balance. 2. He was grinning now. That particular expression men get when they think they're in control and no one's going to stop them. Strand moved in again. This time he grabbed the front of her rifle sling with both hands and twisted. Violently, the strap dug into her collarbone, then her neck. He jerked upward, lifting her partially off the ground by the sling, cutting off her air. 3. Kira's training kicked in, not Marine Corps training, Phoenix training, the kind they taught in unmarked buildings with instructors who'd done things that never made it into after-action reports. Her movement was textbook perfect. Left arm came across Strand's elbow, breaking his grip structure. Right foot stepped behind his lead leg. Hip rotation to redirect his momentum. She didn't strike, didn't punch, didn't kick. Just redirected his own force against him. Strand stumbled backward, not hard, not injured, just neutralized. But the moment he caught his balance, he shouted, "She escalated. She went live." Kellerman moved before the echo faded. "Halt the drill." Kira stood still, breathing, controlled hands at her sides. Rifle still slung, safety still on. She hadn't drawn her sidearm, hadn't done anything except execute a defensive technique that was explicitly authorized in the training manual. Dalridge strode into the circle. His face was carved from anger and something darker. Something that looked like vindication. "Captain Brennan, you just initiated an unapproved escalation of force during a trust evaluation. That's assault under training regulations. Article 128, Uniform Code of Military Justice." The words landed like artillery rounds. Assault. UCMJ court-martial territory. Kira's pulse was hammering, but her voice came out steady. "Master Chief Petty Officer Strand made 3 full-contact strikes. Protocol authorizes defensive response after 3 contacts. I executed a standard redirect. No strikes, no excessive force. You attacked a fellow candidate during a controlled drill. That's not defense, that's aggression." Kellerman was already writing, making it official, making it permanent. The platoon had gathered at the edges of the circle, 22 candidates watching this play out. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked relieved it wasn't them. None of them spoke. Strand stood off to the side, rubbing his arm like he'd been injured. He hadn't been. Kira had been careful, but the performance was what mattered now. Dowridge continued, voice rising just enough to ensure everyone heard. "This assessment is built on trust. Trust that candidates can operate under pressure without compromising their teammates. You just demonstrated you can't be trusted. I'm recommending immediate removal from the program pending a formal review board." Kira felt something cold settle into her chest. This was it, the final play. They'd engineered a situation where defending herself became grounds for dismissal, and there were no witnesses with authority who would contradict the official narrative. She was about to speak, about to say something she knew would be pointless, but felt necessary anyway. Then a voice cut through from the observation tower. "Captain Brennan, my office. Now." Everyone turned. Commander Cade Ryland stood on the elevated walkway that overlooked the training field. 51 years old, average height, lean in the way that came from decades of calculated physical maintenance. His face was weathered but sharp, eyes like gun sights. He wasn't loud, didn't need to be. When Commander Ryland spoke, people listened. Not because of his rank, though, that mattered, but because he carried the kind of presence that came from 30 years of making decisions where hesitation meant body counts. Dowridge's jaw tightened. "Commander, this is an assessment matter." "I said now, Captain." Ryland's tone didn't change, didn't rise, didn't accommodate argument. Kira unclipped her rifle sling, handed the weapon to the nearest candidate, and walked across the sand toward the command building. She didn't look back, didn't try to read the expressions of the men watching her leave. Behind her, the platoon stood in uncomfortable silence, not celebrating, not protesting, just processing the fact that something had shifted and nobody was quite sure what it meant yet. Inside the command building, the air was 20 degrees cooler and smelled like old coffee and printer toner. Kira's boots left sandprints on the polished floor as she followed Ryland up the stairs to the second-level offices. He opened the door to his office, gestured for her to enter, closed it behind them. The office was sparse, a desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, an American flag in the corner. No photographs, no commendations on the walls, no ego displays, just the functional workspace of someone who didn't need decorations to prove what he'd accomplished. Ryland moved to his desk, opened a laptop, turned it to face Kira. "Sit." She sat. He tapped a key, Footage began playing on the screen. Overhead camera angle. High definition. Timestamp in the corner. It was her, running the obstacle course on day one. The timestamp matched her notebook. And the timer on the screen showed 6:43. Clear. Undeniable. Under regulation. Rylan tapped another key. Different footage. The CQB shoot house. Her movements through each room. Smooth. Precise. The final timestamp 4:38. 12 targets eliminated. 0 civilian casualties. Perfect execution. Another tap. The breacher drill. Her charge placement. The clean breach. The minimal scarring on the door frame that Kellerman had cited as excessive charge placement. From this angle, it was obviously cosmetic, obviously within acceptable parameters. More footage. The combat stress gauntlet. Every station, every movement. The final time 7:28. And finally, the belt drill. Crystal clear footage from multiple angles. Strand's 3 full force strikes, the way he grabbed her sling and lifted her off the ground, choking her over him. Her defensive response controlled precise textbook. And then Strand's false claim of excessive force. Rylan let the footage play all the way through. Then he closed the laptop. The silence in the room was absolute. Kira sat very still, her hands in her lap, her breathing controlled. But inside something was shifting, breaking. Not in a bad way, in the way that pressure breaks when someone finally opens the release valve. Rylan leaned back in his chair. His eyes never left hers. "You think I didn't see?" His voice was quiet, measured, but underneath it was something harder. Something that sounded like contained fury. "You think I've been standing on that observation tower for 3 weeks, watching you get sabotaged and didn't notice? You think I don't know exactly what Master Chief Dalridge is doing and why he's doing it?" Kira found her voice. "Then why didn't you stop it, Commander?" Rylan's expression didn't change. "Because if I'd stepped in on day one, they would have said I rigged it for you, that you got special treatment, that you didn't earn it. Every accomplishment you achieved would have been questioned, invalidated, used as evidence that integration doesn't work because it requires favoritism to succeed." He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "You needed to prove it, undeniably, unquestionably. So when I finally did step in, no one, not Dalridge, not Kellerman, not anyone could claim you didn't earn every goddamn second of validation you're about to get." Kira processed that, turned it over in her mind, felt the logic of it even if it had cost her 3 weeks of documented failure and psychological warfare. "And now?" she asked. Rylan opened his desk drawer, slowly, deliberately, reached inside and pulled out something wrapped in dark cloth. He unwrapped it carefully, laid it on the desk between them. A Sig Sauer P2, black polymer frame, worn grip from years of use. Serial number visible on the slide, faded but legible. Kira stared at it, her breath caught. She knew that serial number. Had seen it once years ago in a box of her father's effects that her mother kept in the attic. "Your father's," Rylan said. "Lieutenant Jack Brennan, SEAL Team 3. I carried this weapon off the field in Mogadishu, October 1994, the day he died." He paused, letting the weight of 30 years settle between them. Master Chief Dalridge was on that mission. Somalia. It wasn't his fault. It wasn't the Rangers' fault. It was bad intelligence and compromised communications. But Dalridge watched good men die, and he's been blaming integration ever since. Your father died covering the retreat, bought time for others to escape. Rylan's jaw tightened. "I've carried this for 3 decades, kept it as a reminder of what we lost, what we could have built if trauma hadn't calcified into doctrine." He met her eyes. "I'm not giving this to you yet. You haven't earned it by surviving their sabotage. You'll earn it by proving what your father believed, that competence transcends branch, that integration makes us stronger, and that silence can be more powerful than any argument." Kira's hand moved toward the weapon, then stopped. Understanding. "What happens now?" she asked. Rylan stood, walked to the window. "Now we change the rules. If they won't train you right, I will. Now, Captain, we change the rules. If they won't train you right, I will." He turned back to her. 04:30 tomorrow morning. Range 7, it's a private facility, off the assessment schedule. What we do there doesn't go in any official documentation. but it will prepare you for what's coming. And what's coming, Commander? Ryland's expression was grim. The real test, not the one they've been giving you, the one that actually matters. Kira set the weapon down gently on the desk, nodded once. I'll be there. Good. Dismissed. She stood, walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the handle. Commander, why are you doing this? Ryland didn't turn from the window, just kept staring out at the training field. Because I owe your father, and because you're the best operator I've seen in 15 years, and I'll be damned if I let politics and trauma destroy what could be the future of joint operations. Kira nodded, even though he couldn't see it. Then she opened the door and walked out. Down the hallway, down the stairs, out into the afternoon sun, where 22 candidates were still standing around waiting for someone to tell them what happened next. She walked past them, didn't explain, didn't justify, just retrieved her rifle from the candidate who'd been holding it, slung it across her shoulder, and headed toward the barracks. Behind her, she heard Corporal Hayes' voice, quiet but clear. Whatever just happened, I don't think Dalridge is in control anymore. Kira didn't respond, didn't need to, because Hayes was right. And tomorrow morning at 0430, she was going to start learning exactly what that meant. The alarm on Kira's watch vibrated at 0400. She was already awake, had been for 20 minutes lying in the darkness of the barracks, listening to the rhythmic breathing of candidates who could still sleep without their minds replaying every moment of the past 3 weeks. She dressed in silence, pulled on her uniform with the same precision she always did, laced her boots, checked her gear. The other bunks remained still. No one stirred. No one asked where she was going at this hour. The base was quiet in that pre-dawn way, where even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. Kira walked across the compound toward Range 7, a facility tucked into the northeast corner of the training area, separated from the main ranges by a berm and a stand of eucalyptus trees that had been there longer than the base itself. Commander Ryland was already there, standing in the half-light, a thermos of coffee in one hand, watching her approach with that same measured expression he wore like armor. On time, he said, not a compliment, just an observation. Always, sir. He handed her the thermos. She took a drink, black, strong, the kind that tasted like it had been brewed for function rather than enjoyment. For the next 6 weeks, Ryland said, we're going to run parallel tracks. You'll continue the official assessment, submit to their evaluations, document their failures. But here, every morning at 0430, we run the real standards, the ones that actually matter. He gestured toward the range. In the growing light, Kira could see the setup. A modified shoot house, multiple breach points, elevated positions, low-light configurations. I'm going to test you the way I'd test any SEAL candidate. No handicaps, no modifications, no consideration for anything except whether you can perform when it counts. Kira set down the thermos. I'm ready. We'll see. The first drill was advanced close quarters battle, not the sanitized version from the official assessment. This was the kind they ran for operators headed to actual combat zones. 6 rooms, 18 targets, mix of hostile, civilian, and no-shoot, moving role players, shifting light conditions, and a time hack that didn't forgive a hesitation. Ryland handed her a modified M4, loaded, live ammunition. This wasn't simulation anymore. Rules are simple, he said. Clear the structure, eliminate all hostile targets, 0 civilian casualties, 0 missed threats. You have 6 minutes. Kira checked the weapon. Chamber, sight picture, sling tension. Everything felt right. And if I fail, she asked, Ryland's expression didn't change. Then I stop wasting my time and you go back to fighting a war you can't win. He didn't say it cruelly, just factually. The way you'd tell someone the weather forecast. Kira nodded. Moved to the entry point, controlled her breathing, let her heart rate settle into that space between calm and ready. The buzzer sounded. She breached. First room immediate, 2 hostile targets at angles that required split-second target discrimination. She engaged both with controlled pairs. Center mass, no wasted rounds. Second room presented a problem. Civilian role player holding a phone that in peripheral vision could be mistaken for a weapon. Kira identified, called it. Civilian left side. Moved past without engaging. Third room was the nightmare scenario. Hostile behind partial concealment with a civilian in the backdrop. 6 inches of clearance, maybe less. She took the shot. Clean headshot. The civilian role player didn't flinch. Didn't even register the round passing. Rooms 4 and 5 were rapid clearance. Multiple hostiles. Overlapping fields of fire. She moved with the kind of efficiency that came from muscle memory overriding conscious thought. Pivot. Engage. Assess. Move. Final room was darkness. Complete blackout. She transitioned to her weapon light. Let her eyes adjust for exactly 1 second. Scanned. Found 3 targets, 2 hostile, 1 civilian behind them. She took the angle that gave her clearance. Double-tapped both hostiles. Confirmed the civilian. Moved to extract position. Crossed the threshold. Stopped. Ryland checked his stopwatch. 4 minutes, 38 seconds. 18 hostile targets eliminated. 0 civilian casualties. 0 missed threats. He made a note on his clipboard. Not the falsified kind that Kellerman carried. Just factual documentation. That's SEAL sniper qualified speed, he said. Most of my active team would clock 5:30 on this course. Kira ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, made the weapon safe. What's next? Over the following weeks, the pattern established itself. Official assessment during the day where Darridge and Kellerman continued their campaign of manufactured failures. Private training before dawn where Ryland pushed her through scenarios that made the official drills look like warm-up exercises. Long-range precision shooting at distances that required calculating wind speed, barometric pressure, and Coriolis effect. Combat medicine under pressure treating simulated casualties with injuries that would make experienced paramedics hesitate. Hand-to-hand combat against Ryland himself, a man who'd spent 3 decades learning how to neutralize threats with minimal force and maximum efficiency. During one particularly brutal sparring session in week 5, Kira executed a technique that made Ryland stop mid-engagement. "Where did you learn that?" His voice was sharp, not angry, curious. Kira reset her stance, breathing hard. "Learn what, sir?" "That pressure point manipulation. That's not standard Marine Corps combatives. That's not even standard SEAL close quarters." She hesitated, then decided that lying to Ryland at this point was both impossible and counterproductive. "Task Force Phoenix, sir. 2018 to 21. Win." Ryland's expression shifted. Not much, just enough to show he was recalculating everything he thought he knew about her background. "Phoenix is classified. Off-books joint operations. Multi-branch special activities." "Yes, sir." "That program doesn't officially exist, which means it doesn't appear in your service record." "No, sir." Ryland walked to the water station, took a drink, thought for a long moment. "How many missions?" 14, sir. Yemen, Syria, Horn of Africa. All classified, all successful." He turned back to her. "You've been holding back. This entire assessment, you've been operating at maybe 70% of your actual capability." "Yes, sir." "While," Kira met his eyes, "because if Master Chief Dalridge knew I was already trained beyond SEAL integration standards, he'd claim preferential treatment, prior access, unfair advantage. This way I prove that even baseline Marine Force recon training meets your requirements. That's what my father believed. That's what I'm here to demonstrate." Ryland processed that, nodded slowly. "Your father would be proud and probably worried that you're too smart for your own good." "He wouldn't be wrong, sir." The official assessment continued its downward trajectory of absurd failures and invented deficiencies. By week 8, Kira had accumulated 23 documented failures in her official evaluation file, each one meticulously recorded by Kellerman. Each one equally meticulously documented with contradicting evidence in her waterproof notebook. But something else was happening. The other candidates were noticing. More than noticing, they were starting to question. After a particularly egregious marking during week 7, where Kira had completed a tactical navigation exercise, 15 minutes under standard, and been failed for insufficient route verification. 3 candidates approached her at evening chow: Corporal Hayes, Petty Officer Everett Hale, and Lieutenant Boone McAllister, a 45-year-old SEAL who rarely spoke but carried the kind of credibility that came from 20 years of quiet competence. McAllister set his tray down across from her. "Captain Brennan got a minute." Kira looked up from her meal. "Sure." McAllister glanced around, made sure no instructors were in earshot. We've been comparing notes, unofficial, the three of us and a few others. Your performance metrics versus your evaluation scores. They don't match, not even close. Hayes leaned in. We've all seen you run these drills. You're faster than half the SEALs I've trained with. More precise. Better tactical decision-making. But your official file reads like you can barely tie your boots. Hale added, I spoke up once. During the combat stress gauntlet, Dahlridge shut me down, but I wasn't wrong. And I'm not the only one who's noticed. Kira set down her fork, carefully. What are you asking? McAllister's voice dropped. We're asking if you're documenting this. Because if you are, and if this ever goes to review, you're going to need witnesses. People willing to testify that what's in your official file isn't what actually happened. She studied them. Three men who had everything to lose by backing her and nothing to gain except the satisfaction of being right. I'm documenting everything, she said quietly. Times, discrepancies, details. But I can't ask you to put your careers on the line. McAllister smiled. It was tired. You're not asking, we're offering, because some of us still believe this integration concept might actually work. And watching it get sabotaged by personal grudges and institutional trauma isn't something we're comfortable ignoring anymore. Hayes nodded. Plus you make the rest of us look bad. If they're failing you, what does that say about the standards they're using to pass us? It was humor, dark, but underneath it was something real. Solidarity, the kind that formed when people recognized injustice and decided it was worth risking something to correct it. Kira felt something shift in her chest. Not relief, not gratitude, just a quiet acknowledgement that she wasn't fighting this alone anymore. Thank you, she said, simple, genuine. McAllister stood. Don't thank us yet. This gets ugly before it gets better. Dahlridge doesn't strike me as someone who backs down gracefully. He was right. Week 9 brought the event that would force everything into the open. The final combat readiness assessment, a comprehensive evaluation that combined elements from every previous drill into one continuous operation lasting 90 minutes. It was designed to simulate a direct action mission, infiltrate a compound, neutralize hostiles, recover intelligence, extract under fire, all while managing casualties, equipment failures, and the kind of chaos that turned training into trauma if you weren't ready. The entire assessment cadre would observe. Dahlridge, Kellerman, senior instructors from across the SEAL community, and though Kira didn't know it yet, Commander Ryland, and a quiet delegation from Joint Special Operations Command who'd been monitoring the integration program with increasing concern. Kira drew the 4th position in the rotation, early enough to avoid the fatigue factor, late enough that the evaluators would be warmed up and watching carefully. She geared up in silence, checked her weapons, verified her communications equipment, ran through the mental checklist that had kept her alive in places where mistakes were measured in body counts. When her name was called, she moved to the start line. Dahlridge stood with his clipboard and his stopwatch and that expression that suggested he had already written her evaluation before she'd even started. Captain Brennan, he said, this is your final assessment. Performance here determines whether you continue in the program or separate. Understood. Yes, Master Chief. Then execute. The scenario began. Kira infiltrated through the primary approach, moved with the kind of controlled aggression that bridged the gap between caution and momentum. First contact came at the outer perimeter. 2 hostile role players with simulated weapons. She engaged with precision, neutralized both, continued movement. The compound breach required explosive entry. She set the charge with the same careful calculations she'd used in Helmand Province and a dozen other places that didn't appear in official records, called the countdown. Initiated, clean breach, no structural compromise, no fragmentation risk. Textbook execution. Inside the scenario escalated. Multiple rooms, overlapping threats, moving role players who didn't follow predictable patterns. She cleared each space with the efficiency Ryland had drilled into her over 6 weeks of pre-dawn training sessions. Midway through the scenario introduced a complication. A simulated casualty. Wounded role player with arterial bleeding. She transitioned from combat mode to medical mode in seconds. Applied tourniquet, administered pressure, stabilized, then back to combat mode. because threats didn't wait for you to finish being compassionate. The intelligence recovery phase required navigating a room filled with simulated sensitive documents while under time pressure and sporadic contact. She prioritized, photographed key materials, marked secondary items, made decisions in seconds that other candidates spent minutes agonizing over. Final phase was extraction under fire, simulated enemy reinforcements, smoke, pyrotechnics, the sensory overload designed to break situational awareness and turn operators into panicked civilians. Kira maintained control, directed her simulated team through hand signals when radio communication became compromised, provided covering fire, executed tactical withdrawal with the kind of discipline that separated professionals from amateurs. She crossed the extraction threshold. Mission complete. Her lungs were burning, her uniform was soaked through, every muscle was screaming. But she was standing, and more importantly, she'd executed every phase within regulation parameters. Dawridge checked his stopwatch. His face was stone. The time was irrelevant. Kira had performed flawlessly, and everyone watching knew it. But Dawridge opened his mouth anyway. "Captain Brennan, you'll be marked for, belay that, Master Chief." Every head turned. Commander Ryland stepped down from the observation platform. Behind him, 3 senior officers in JSOC insignia that Kira didn't recognize. Their presence changed the atmosphere immediately. This wasn't base-level oversight anymore. This was command intervention. Dawridge's jaw tightened. "Commander, this is an assessment evaluation, which is now under formal review." Ryland's voice was flat. Final. Captain Brennan performed within all established parameters. Her execution was tactically sound and operationally effective. Any evaluation to the contrary will require substantiation through documented evidence and independent verification. One of the JSOC officers stepped forward, a full colonel, combat infantry badge, ranger tab, the kind of resume that commanded respect across all branches. "Master Chief Dawridge, I'm Colonel Warren Price, Joint Special Operations Command Integration Oversight. We've been monitoring this assessment program for the past 6 weeks based on reported irregularities. I'm formally requesting all evaluation documentation for Captain Brennan and all other candidates in this cycle for immediate review." The silence that followed was absolute. Kellerman, standing off to the side with his clipboard, had gone pale. Strand looked confused. The other candidates watched with expressions ranging from vindication to concern. Dawridge stood very still, processing, calculating, realizing that whatever control he'd maintained over the narrative was evaporating. "Sir, all evaluations have been conducted according to established assessment protocols. Then the documentation will support that claim." Colonel Price's tone suggested he already knew it wouldn't. "We'll convene a review board tomorrow at 0800. All instructors, all candidates, all evidence." "Commander Ryland, I understand you have supplementary documentation." "Yes, sir. Comprehensive helmet camera footage from multiple sources, independent timing verification, and detailed records of assessment inconsistencies." Price nodded. "Excellent. Master Chief Dawridge, Chief Kellerman, you're both relieved of assessment duties pending review. Lieutenant Commander McAllister will assume interim oversight." Dawridge's face went rigid. "Sir, I've been running this program." "And now you're not. Dismissed, Master Chief." It wasn't a suggestion. Dawridge stared at Ryland for a long moment. Something passed between them. 30 years of shared history, shared trauma, shared failures, and now shared reckoning. Then he turned and walked off the training field. Kellerman followed, his clipboard hanging uselessly at his side. The candidates remained in formation, not sure what to do, not sure what this meant. Colonel Price addressed them. "All candidates will be reassessed over the next 48 hours by independent evaluators. Previous marks are suspended pending review. That means everyone starts from baseline. Fair evaluation, transparent criteria, no exceptions." He looked at Kira. "Captain Brennan, you're dismissed for today. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be long." Kira nodded. "Yes, sir." She walked off the training field. Every step felt surreal, like the ground had shifted, and she wasn't quite sure if it was solid yet. Behind her, she heard Hayes's voice, quiet but clear. "About damn time." The review board convened at 0800 in the base conference room, a sterile space with gray walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. Dawridge sat on one side of the long table. Kellerman beside him, both in their dress uniforms, both with expressions that suggested they knew how this was going to end, but weren't ready to accept it yet. Kira sat across from them, Commander Ryland to her right, Colonel Price at the head of the table with two other JSOC officers flanking him. The evidence was laid out methodically. Helmet camera footage showing every drill Kira had run, time-stamped, unedited. Her notebook with its meticulous documentation of discrepancies. Official evaluation forms with their fabricated failures. And finally, the classified file from Task Force Phoenix, 14 missions, 3 Bronze Stars, 1 Silver Star, all previously classified, all now declassified specifically for this review. Colonel Price reviewed it all, took his time, asked questions, verified sources. Then he looked at Delridge. Master Chief, you evaluated Captain Brennan as failing 23 separate drills over the course of 9 weeks. The evidence shows she performed within or above regulation standards on all 23 occasions. Explain the discrepancy. Darridge's jaw worked. Sir, evaluation criteria include more than raw performance metrics. They include assessment of sustainable PACE team integration, potential psychological resilience under institutional pressure. Master Chief, Price's voice cut through. Did you fail Captain Brennan because she performed poorly or because you didn't want her to succeed? The question hung in the air like ordnance. Darridge stared at the table, at his hands, at anything except the people watching him. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, eroded. Her father was Lieutenant Jack Brennan, SEAL Team 3, killed in Mogadishu 1994 during a joint operations mission that I survived. That mission failed because coordination broke down, because trust wasn't there, because we tried to integrate forces that didn't have the foundation to operate as one unit. He looked up, met Kira's eyes for the first time. I've spent 30 years believing integration was the problem, that keeping our branches specialized and separate made us stronger, safer, that your father died proving joint operations didn't work. His voice cracked, just slightly. But watching you these past 9 weeks, I realized something I didn't want to admit. You're better than most of my operators. Faster, smarter, more tactically sound. And that meant everything I'd believed, everything I'd taught, everything I'd used to justify my survival when better men died was wrong. The room was silent. So yes, Colonel, I failed her because I didn't want her to succeed. Because her success meant confronting the fact that I've wasted 3 decades being wrong. And that Jack Brennan died for something that could have worked if men like me had been brave enough to let it. Kira sat very still. She'd expected denial, expected justification, expected anything except this raw, brutal honesty. Colonel Price wrote something, then looked at Kellerman. Chief, what's your role in this? Kellerman had no such honesty to offer. Sir, I was following evaluation guidance from the senior instructor. You falsified documentation, edited timestamps, created assessment criteria that don't exist in any manual. Price's voice was ice. That's not following guidance. That's conspiracy to defraud the assessment process. Kellerman's face went white. Price closed the file. Master Chief Dalridge, you're hereby relieved of all instructional duties pending formal administrative review. Your conduct demonstrates bias incompatible with assessment integrity. However, your honesty today will be noted in the final report. He turned to Kellerman. Chief Kellerman, you're reassigned to non-operational administrative duties effective immediately. You'll face separate proceedings for documentation fraud. Then he looked at Kira. Captain Brennan, based on independent review of your actual performance, you've exceeded SEAL integration standards across all evaluation categories. Your assessment is marked as passed with a recommendation for immediate assignment to Joint Special Operations Integration Training Command. He paused. Additionally, your Task Force Phoenix service record has been formally incorporated into your official file, with appropriate commendations. Kira nodded. Thank you, sir. Price stood. This board is adjourned. Captain Brennan, Commander Ryland, remained for a moment. The others filed out. Dalridge moved slowly, stopped as he passed Kira's chair. Your father was the best operator I ever served with, he said quietly. I'm sorry it took me 30 years and watching you prove me wrong to remember that. Kira looked at him, saw past the Master Chief insignia and the SEAL trident and the 3 decades of accumulated authority. Saw just a man who'd carried trauma so long it had calcified into doctrine. Master Chief, my father believed in second chances. So do I. Something in Dowridge's expression softened. Not forgiveness, not absolution, just acknowledgement. He nodded once, then left. When the room was empty except for Kira Ryland and Colonel Price, the atmosphere shifted, became less formal. Price leaned back in his chair. Captain, we've been watching this assessment program since week 3. Multiple candidates reported irregularities, but we needed to see how deep the problem went before intervening. You used me as bait, Kira said. Not accusatory, just factual. We gave you an opportunity to prove something that needed proving, Price corrected. And you did. Now we need you to build something. He slid a folder across the table. Joint Special Operations Integration Training Command, new unit, first of its kind, designed to train the next generation of cross-branch operators. We need someone who understands both the vision and the resistance. Someone who's lived through the worst of institutional bias and came out the other side with their competence intact. Kira opened the folder, read the assignment brief. It was everything her father had believed in, everything she'd spent 9 weeks proving was possible. When do I start? 30 days, after you complete one final obligation. He pulled out another document. There's a female Army Ranger candidate entering the next assessment cycle. Lieutenant Sarah Voss, smart, capable, already facing the same skepticism you did. She needs a mentor, someone who's been through this and survived it. Kira understood immediately. You want me to train her the way Commander Ryland trained me. Exactly. Break the cycle. Build the foundation. Show her it's possible. She looked at Ryland. He gave her that slight nod that meant more than words. I'll do it, Kira said. 6 months later, Kira stood in her new office at Joint Special Operations Integration Training Command. The walls were still mostly bare. A few certificates she hadn't bothered framing yet. A photograph of her father in his SEAL dress uniform, and mounted in a display case on the desk, the Sig Sauer P226, her father's weapon, the one Commander Ryland had carried for 30 years, the one he'd given her in that moment when everything changed. Below it, a small plaque, carried by LT Jack Brennan as SEAL Team 3 1991-1994, earned by CPT Kira Brennan 2025, now serves all who follow. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ryland. Voss arrives tomorrow, 0600. Range 7. She's ready. Are you? Kira smiled. Typed back, always. The next morning, she waited at Range 7 as the sun crept over the horizon. The air was cool, quiet, full of potential. A figure approached through the half-light. Lieutenant Sarah Voss, 26 years old, Army Ranger. Walking with that particular combination of confidence and uncertainty that came from being good at something, but not yet knowing if it would be enough. Kira watched her approach, remembered standing in this exact spot 6 months ago, remembered the fear and the determination and the absolute certainty that she was walking into a fight she might not win. Voss stopped, came to attention. Ma'am, Lieutenant Sarah Voss reporting as ordered. At ease, Lieutenant, Kira gestured toward the shoot house. You know why you're here. I'm entering the SEAL integration assessment next week, ma'am. I was told you could help prepare me. Help prepare you? Kira let the words hang. Lieutenant, the assessment you're about to face isn't designed to evaluate your capabilities. It's designed to break you, to prove you don't belong, to validate assumptions that have nothing to do with your actual performance. Voss's expression hardened. Then why go through it? Because someone has to. Because the system doesn't change until enough people prove it's broken and offer something better. Kira walked to her office door, opened it, returned with a display case containing her father's weapon. She set it on the bench between them. This belonged to my father. Lieutenant Jack Brennan, SEAL Team 3. He died in 1990 believing that integration made us stronger. I spent 9 weeks proving he was right. Now I'm passing that proof to you. She opened the case, removed the P226, slid it across the bench toward Voss. Pick it up. Voss hesitated. Ma'am, I don't understand. You will. Pick it up. Let's find out what you're really made of. Slowly, Voss reached out, took the weapon, Her hands moved with the automatic precision of someone who'd been handling firearms since basic training, safety verification, weight assessment, grip adjustment. No hesitation, just muscle memory. Kira nodded. Good. Now we start the real training. Not the one they'll give you at the official assessment, the one that actually prepares you for what matters. She handed Voss a waterproof notebook. Document everything. Times, names, discrepancies. Facts don't need volume. They need precision. When you have undeniable evidence, one quiet statement carries more weight than 1,000 loud complaints. Voss looked at the notebook, then at Kira. Understanding was beginning to dawn. How bad is it going to get? Kira thought about the past 9 weeks, the manufactured failures, the public humiliation, the moment when Dalridge had weaponized her father's death in front of an entire formation. Bad enough that you'll question whether it's worth it. But if you make it through, you won't just pass an assessment. You'll change what's possible for everyone who comes after. She extended her hand. So, are you ready? Voss took her hand, shook it firmly. Yes, ma'am. Then let's get to work. As they walked toward the range, the sun breaking fully over the horizon, now Kira felt something settle into place. Not completion, not victory, just the quiet satisfaction of passing something forward, of taking the pain and the struggle and the absolute refusal to break and turning it into foundation for someone else. Her father had believed integration would work. She'd proved it. And now Lieutenant Sarah Voss would build on that proof. One operator at a time, one assessment at a time, one moment of choosing competence over comfort until the day when no one had to prove it anymore because it was simply understood. The weapon would pass from hand to hand, the notebook would fill with documentation, and the silence would keep speaking louder than any argument ever could. Because some truths didn't need defending, they just needed demonstrating. And that demonstration started here, at 0430, on a range that had witnessed failure and triumph and everything in between, where women who refused to break came to learn they were already whole. Later that evening, after Sarah Voss had returned to her barracks with a notebook and a training schedule that would redefine her understanding of preparation, Kira stood alone at the memorial wall. Her father's name still there, still 3 rows from the top, but the weight of it had changed. She pressed her palm against the granite. Cool, permanent, final in ways that legacies never were. I did it, Dad, she said quietly. Not to the stone, not to the memory, to the belief that had outlived the man who'd carried it into his last firefight. Integration works, not because I'm exceptional, because the idea was right all along. The wind off the Pacific carried salt and possibility. Somewhere behind her, Range 7 sat empty, waiting for tomorrow's 0430 arrival, waiting for the next operator who'd need to learn that silence wasn't surrender, it was certainty. Kira pulled her hand back, turned, walked toward her quarters. The weapon would pass forward. The notebook would fill with new documentation. And 30 years of trauma would finally begin healing into wisdom. Because her father hadn't died proving integration didn't work. He died so that one day his daughter could prove it did. And that was a legacy worth carrying.